Well, we continue our analysis of the Koltanovsky gambit variation. Very exciting, as I think you've seen already. And now we're going to move on to, I suppose, what I consider to be one of the two main lines. And let's just get to our so-called position, because I think you've seen it enough now to hopefully understand the move order to get there. And we're castling here. Remember to castle first when the bishop comes here. If the knight comes out, you play d4 first. We'll do that later. And now this exciting d4 move. Bishop takes and pawn takes, the two best tries. And we grab that bishop, bishop g5, as we've seen before. And black clearly has a number of options here. A number of interesting options. We looked at all these ideas, castling, queen e7, knight e6 in the last video, where white has very, very nice chances. And h6 is a very normal move that black will play. And I think it's a decent move to play, definitely. Trying to break the pin immediately, which of course we do not allow. We move our bishop to h4. But is the inclusion of these two moves good for black or not? Black is kind of arguing that it is, because it means he can play G5 in one move rather than two moves. For example, if he kept doing other moves rather than h6, he'd have to go h6 and g5. And what should black now play? And this is where he can go wrong very quickly. This is a minefield for black in this Koltanovsky variation. I expect I say that differently every time I pronounce it. You know where I'm getting at. Well, I mean, the obvious move, which I think is g5, trying to break that pin, is really bad. And we've already covered this in the model game with Christensen and Bachmann, because of the amazing move. Boom! F4. Yes, my friend. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. And F4 is just a very, very strong move, right? And we analysed this, like I say, in that game. So I think we don't need to go into that anymore. Now, other options will quite likely transpose into what we've already seen in the last chapter. For example, you know, if black castles here, we just obviously play F4 again. These kind of moves, quite logical. Is there any independent value here? Well, I think d6 is the best move. And this is a move where, and one of the main lines, and this is what we're kind of concentrating on here. And this leads to quite similar to the Dubov-Rajbov game with best play. Now, if queen e7 again, there is this idea of this queen c5, which we've seen, obviously, previously. I mean, the one downside of black playing h6 as well, if you think about this in other terms, let's just say black castles, we go back there again. We play f4, and now he plays, for example, d6, which is the main move when the bishop's on g5 is the pawn here. Well, it could be argued that the pawn on h6 is also a target. It's also quite a weakness. So, for example, if knight c3, c6, which again was that main sort of line we saw before, we should now take here. Now, king h1 was the main move when the bishop's here and the pawn's here. But in this variation, there's more of an argument to be said for taking here immediately and moving the queen in. Why is there more of an argument here? Because we're threatening the pawn on h6. This pawn would actually be a bit better back on h7, because now black has to waste a move defending that pawn, and this can allow us to generate a more dangerous initiative on the king side. So there is downsides to this line as well. Let's go back though. So queen e7, and again, queen e7, we still go f4. Now, obviously queen c5 is a scary looking move, but as we've seen previously, this scary looking move can be faced normally by something on f7 combined with e5, or taken on e5 combined with something on f7. And in this particular case, well, you know, knight c3 does not need to be played first of all, and it shouldn't be played actually, because G5 now is an option, we should play F4 straight away. So this is where it's slightly differing to, again, these little moves played in. And you've got to realize when H6 has been played, G5 is a move which is going to hit us a bit quicker. So, for example, after Queen E7, if we try to play in the same manner that we did with the bishop back on G5 with this one, then black plays G5 immediately. And you're kind of like, well, we're only playing knight C3 to threaten knight D5. And in this circumstance, the knight's not really going there. F4 is still interesting here, of course, but it's better to play F4 immediately. And here again, black really should play Queen C5. And in this position, as long as we remember to take on E5, we get our ongoing initiative again. And you know, it's very easy to get scared by this kind of thing, but we got to remember we are trying to play like Morphy. We're trying to play this course is to play as aggressively as possible in a sound way. So when we can attack and ignore our opponent's threats, we should do. This is one such case. Now, there's only really one option here, and that's knight to F3 check. Everything else like this is just going to be bad for black because our king is safe, our opponent's king is weak, and this could be devastated very quickly. So black's got to try knight F3 check, and now we get the forcing move king H1. And the next move is forced as well. Our bishop is incredibly strong, and it's really got to be removed. I mean, knight takes E5, trying to come around the angles to consolidate is an option, but now we get a chance to take on F6, which I think we should do now before G5's come. And I like the move bishop E2 here. And this keeps control of G4 for when something wants to come here. And our main idea is just bringing our knight into D5, combined with some standard easy moves to pressurize F6. And this F6 pawn will drop. There's no way black's going to be able to hold on to that one for a long time. And again, we have this nice idea of it's just simple. Again, a lot of these gambit lines, you don't panic. You have to be in the gambit for the long term. You have to live being a pawn down, but you live with having the extra pressure. It's like you put a little investment in, and it's a long-term investment, and it's going to, you're maybe a little bit afraid because it is an investment. It's a pawn in this case, but when it comes back, it's going to come back good with a little bit extra on the top. Oh yeah, that's what we like when we invest. I'm a terrible investor. I don't think I've ever had an opportunity to invest in my life, but you kind of get the idea. I'm sure that's what investment's all about, right? Get those bitcoins when they go over 30,000, 100,000. You know the score. So this seems a very simple way to play, doesn't it? I mean, what's black doing? I mean, yeah, he's got a nice knight, but it's not really doing anything when we take on F6. So knight takes H4 is better, and here we take on F6, and yes, this is the critical line because we're a pawn down. This happening Bergs versus William Taylor 2016, and Bergs went wrong immediately in this position. Of course, you've got to prove your compensation. And this is where that tempo, that energy, you can't just suddenly start playing too slowly when you're a whole piece down. And taking on F7 on G7 is clearly correct. And now knight to C3. And this is really an interesting position. This is the kind of reason I like these gambit lines. They're not that well explored. They offer full compensation, but they're not as well analysed as some of the King's Gambit lines. Yes, again, I know we're a piece down and the G pawn is dropping, but development does count. We've got these ideas. Black King is not happy. So, for example, Rook takes G7 is the most normal move, but this is actually a mistake because of Queen H5, and this is just very good for white. Black can't lose the piece, so he has to move it back. And now we just take on H6, King F8, and now just Knight D5. And this knight's coming to F6 and then coming to H5. And there's no adequate way for black to stop that. And we're going to win our material back with the attack. We've also got ideas here, of course, of putting the rook there and bringing the rook around. We got everything. And it's always these black pieces over here which are the problem. You've got to play powerful chess in these lines. So rook takes G7 is a mistake. C6, must be the best defensive move to stop this powerful idea. And again, you know, we do have to play with urgency, but, you know, we've got to get all our pieces in the game. This goes back to that philosophy. Look at your active pieces. Well, at the moment, our pieces are not that active, so we've got to get in reinforcements. Queen d2, clearly correct, trying to bring this one in. And again, black can go wrong very quickly here. For example, queen e6, defending that one, fails to this lovely idea, knight d5. Morphe, Morphe, Morphe. This knight has to be captured because it has 2 threats, and this allows the opening of the e file. And after this, we're 2 pieces down, but we don't give a damn because queen g4, and, you know, black is in a diabolical situation. For example, knight to g6, we're otherwise going to win that knight, and now rook f6. And it's amazing how our queen and 2 rooks can just win the game for us. Queen c7, there's nowhere else that queen can move. And what's the final winning move? Rook takes g6. Queen coming in here. Just one of the many beautiful lines, unexplored, unplayed lines in this course. So I hope you're grateful. I hope you get your money's worth. I know these courses are expensive, so you've got to bear in mind, we want you to get your money's worth, definitely, and to learn a great opening. So queen e6 is actually a mistake, and here d6 is another obvious move when we could take over here, but actually bringing in the reinforcements, bringing in our rook to e1 is actually even stronger. And this keeps enough play for the piece because we're threatening knight d5. Crazy gambit lines, right? But again, they're working, and they're backed up the computer program. Gives us the all clear. For example, bishop e6, knight comes in. That knight incredibly powerful. If it's taken, we take this way, and we're actually threatening rook f4 as well as taking this with 2 pieces down. But let's have a look. Let's take on e6, rook f4, pawn takes here, coming, so queen c6 only move, and we get a kind of crazy line here when we have to play, unfortunately, rook e2, but black is in a lot of trouble here with queen e3 coming and that pawn queening. So this is, again, good line for white. And again, these lines, I do recommend you learn these lines because they're sharp. And one thing about this course is, you know, compared to the Iron English, there's more sharp lines that I recommend you memorize than in the Iron English because you're playing in the most aggressive way possible. So you need to find a way to keep the fire burning. As soon as you let that fire fade out, the opening has lost. The openings we're suggesting have lost their punch. So after queen here, what about knight g6 straight away? Well, another little move I want to put out there is e5. And this can't be taken because the horrible ideas of the knight coming in. So rook takes g7 is forced. And again, this rook e1, bringing the last piece in, gives us full compensation for the piece. It's really quite funny, actually. These amazing lines. Knight e4 is a really big threat. And if something like queen b4 now, trying to stop that one, it's now time to take on h6. Black has to come back, and the knight comes in. King d8, knight d6. Yes, white is still a piece down. Black has saved his extra piece. But we've got rook here coming, and black's in a tremendously bad bind here. With our h-pawn coming up later on, I think it's clear to see, again, we have enough for the piece. Do remember, all these lines have been checked with the computer, so you can be assured with the analysis. So queen e7, you know, if we're going back through this h6, bishop h4, queen e7 idea, queen e7 is a very interesting idea. And here, this is where we play f4 immediately. It's just the correct way to do it. And after queen c5, this is where we have to take here. I'll just look at this one more time. Check. Knight takes h4 critical. Queen takes c4 critical. And we get this position with knight c3. But what a wild and relatively unexplored and exciting position to play. You're going to have so much fun with this. So Queen e7 is, again, not such a well-known move here, but interesting. But d6 is a more commonly played move, and this is what we've decided upon as one of the two main lines. This move and d6 immediately in this position, because the idea is sensible. Black wants to get his pieces out. We continue to open lines with our normal next blow, f4, and this is again key. And the problem is, if we go queen d2, g5 is now, it's annoying now because our f4 is not working as well, because d6 gives black an extra developing move. So we should play f4 straight away. And now bishop g4. Otherwise, we're going to get our standard play. We're taking here. If bishop e6, we come back to d3. This is quite an important thing to generally remember in most variations. We want our knight to come out, and we keep this pressure, stop black from easily castling. So bishop g4, and now this is very similar to one of the games we looked at the start of the chapter, start of the whole course. Can you remember the Christensen-Bachmann game? Really a key game in the model games to understand this opening. And this is one case where we go for the ending, because queen d2 often runs into knight e4 or g5. And remember, the g5 move is a bit annoying in a lot of lines. Maybe not particularly here, but it can be very annoying. So the way we play against bishop g4, just keep it simple. We always go for the ending, bishop f6. And yeah, we get to an ending, but we still have chances of an advantage in the ending. So now we get a fourth sequence of moves, because the bishop's on pre. It has to take the queen. We have to take the queen. Now rook d8 is played. And now rook takes d1. We're gonna go for here. Now with the pawn on h6, we're actually giving c3, and you can still play c3 here, which is pretty much the same as that. But I just thought I'd mix it about and show you that white has two decent moves. c3 was kind of Dubov's idea, but I just want to show you that rook d1 is very playable, and maybe even a little bit simpler, because it gets rid of things immediately. And this is striving for the maximum from the position, but it is quite risky. We're going to have two pieces for the rook and a number of pawns, but we have an ongoing initiative with this move. Now, again, c3 leads to some lines which are very similar to the Dubov game. After bishop e2, we take bishop c4, rook c1. And this is, again, if you want to look at this more, just have a look at that in the notes to Christensen-Bachmann, the game Dubov versus Rajbov. And this covers all this, where this is a much safer way to play, where we have chances of a small edge in the endgame. But I just wanted to throw in rook takes d1, just to see if you like the look of this. Knight takes c2, obviously has to be forced. And now our knight comes here. Again, little force sequence. At the moment, is 2 pawns. After this, black has 3 pawns and a rook for these two guys. So if you're counting points, he has too many. 5 plus 3, Simon. 8 plus 6. He's 2 points up. But you will often find very weird cases where these two minor pieces are actually very, very dynamic, and they give us full compensation. Now, I think this position, if I was going to put an assessment on it, I would say probably a very fair assessment would be equally unbalanced. So equally, but unbalanced. I mean, but it's white who has the initiative, and if I was going to keep it simple, and I really needed to win as white in this line, the rook endings ones where basically in this position we play c3 have more drawing tendency. So if I didn't mind a draw, I'd probably go c3. But if I really needed to win, I would go for this line. And let's just have a look at this position. Now here in the Dubov game with the bishop, with the pawn back here, h4 works very well. And again, we saw that because it stops g5. But in this position, h4 is not working so well, because h6 tempo actually helps black, because he has this extra protection with this move. And again, we looked at this in that model game. So the way we should play this, and this happened in a game with German FM Marco Reilly, and he had this against Igor Lisi, a very strong grandmaster from Russia. And he played this in the chess.com Title Tuesday competition, scoring maximum points against grandmasters in the position. So the German player Marco Reilly has to be credited for showing that this is very playable. And his preferred choice is just knight d5, just trying to get back some of the material. And again, black has some choices here. He's got to decide where he puts his king, really. So we're going to get a pawn back. Now, Igor Lisi, this very strong Russian, just castled here. King d7 stops us taking there. And after something like knight takes f4, rook to e8, what do we think of this? Well, I would now go for bishop d3. I'm following the game of Marco, the German FM. And after something like rook e5, rook f1. And again, I would say fair assessment, dynamically equal. We have that pawn down, but our knight and bishop always better than a rook generally. The bishop is a little bit passive, unfortunately, here. But one idea well worth remembering here is bringing a knight into d4. And there's going to be a lot of pawns this knight can eventually attack. Black is not able to get an easy pass pawn. If he was, then this wouldn't be working. And this just seems to be a position that deserves more practice, more play. And what side would you like to take here? I mean, that's what you've got to think. If you don't like this, go for the rook ending. But this is very interesting. I really do like this idea of bringing the knight to d4, by the way. And it just deserves more practical chances. I mean, I think this is one of Black's best lines in this. Igor Lisi decided to castle, also quite similar, just the kings in different place. And let's have a look at how this one went. It went similar, c6, rook f1. And there's other things. This one now, we don't have the pressure against f7. But the way that White ended up playing this one was ideas of like pushing on the king side. So here, king h2, g4, king g3, and eventually trying to create a little bit of a minority attack with the pawns. And again, I think dynamically equal is a fair assessment here. It's not clear how Black is going to break. If Black ever plays d5, that pawn is very likely to be lost later on because it's going to be hit by a number of pieces. So Black can't easily get a passed pawn. Our pawn here stops all that. And we've got just a very intriguing position. Now, this, of course, is your alternative. To demonstrate, if you want to really win and you want to get an unbalanced ending, this is the way to go. Let's just show you the other option again, I think. So we're going d4 and the main line with h6. Now, it is worth thinking that we're going to come to d6 in a minute, but this line with d6 is a way that Black can get into an ending, but it's an ending we should be happy to play. We have this forced line now, well, bishop after bishop g4, where we get into the ending, and we have to go into the ending. Now, this is where you have the choice of c3, and if c3, bishop e2 has to be found, and with rook c1, we go into this, well, the best way that this can be played is as such. Here takes, and we have this kind of thing going on here, as we've seen in the introductory game. But the other option I'm suggesting here is to go into this very weird position, which does require more practical tries, which I think fair assessment dynamically equal. So you've got that kind of solid rook ending in the introduction where you shouldn't ever lose, like drawing hand, you can push, or you've got this ending where it's a bit more risky, but it's more dynamic. The choice is yours. Other things to remember, this queen e7 is a very dynamic choice by Black. And whenever Black plays queen e7 in this variation, you're pretty much forced to go for it. When the pawn's on h7, the rule is you go knight c3 first. But when the pawn's on h6, you go f4 immediately. And you're going to be forced to sacrifice a piece in these lines. But as the computer has showed me and Richard, it's fully backed up with enough compensation. And it's very exciting lines that you're going to get. So f4, exciting way to play this one. But just remember your timing of f4. And it does depend on whether h6 has been played or not. For example, in this case, if the queen comes here, then knight c3 is the way to play. And you just got to go over the lines, practice them out to get become an expert in them. And the one last thing we need to look at here is what happens if d6 is played immediately in this position.